Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Professor Kevin Volkan, a founding faculty member and professor of psychology at California State University, Channel Islands. Professor Volkan holds doctorates in clinical and quantitative psychology. He's a graduate of the Harvard School of Public Health and a former Harvard Medical School administrator and faculty member. He's the author of Dancing Among the Maenads, The Psychology of Compulsive Drug Use, which is available to download for free at freepsychotherapiebooks.org. He's also a working musician and plays guitar in 2 bands. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From Chapart Books, 2019. For more, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. For more information, you can also visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode.
It's one of the things I've been wanting to explore, and I haven't had time to do, but I'm looking at a sort of a psychoanalytic look at musicians and music and stuff like that. And it's interesting because I think I sent you the thing, the latest training that I've been getting. I just finished a 3-year program with this guy, Robert Bosnak, who's a Jungian analyst, who was Hillman's protege. He would not like me saying that, by the way. So Robbie, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to, this is a shortcut to describe you. He was Hillman's protege, James Hillman's protege, and who is sort of the founder of archetypal psychology and a rogue Jungian, right? The rogue Jungian of all times. And then Robbie and him had a sort of great love-hate relationship. And Robbie has sort of gone in his own thing and developed something he calls embodied imagination. And it's a form of dream work. And I did it personally. I was referred to Robbie, and I went to see him and did the work with him as just a patient, and it was very, very great for me. And I thought, this is wonderful. And I thought, maybe I should train on this. I have nothing else to do. This would be a good thing to do. And so I did the training. I finished it. It was a 3-year training. I finished it last year, and it is a form of dream work, which is very cool because Robbie likes to work a lot with artists and musicians. People use it for psychotherapy. They use it for medical conditions. And but Robbie likes to work with artists, and especially actors and writers, and he's very interested in working with musicians. And so I was the practitioner in the group who was also a musician. So I did a lot of my dream work around my playing and playing better, and my final project for, we had to do a final project for the training, and my final project was to play at a club in Hollywood, because we did the training in LA, play in a club in Hollywood and invite everybody in the group down to listen. And Robbie and Jill, who's the other trainer, got to come down and listen to his play in Hollywood. That was my final exam, which was really cool and fun. But it's a great method for working with artists, because what it really does is it unleashes creativity. It's not so in a kind of neo-Jungian sense. It's not so pathology driven. It's really about enhancing people's creativity. That enhanced creativity can help you with pathology. It can help you with medical problems. It can also help you with artistic endeavors. And so Robbie's a writer. He writes a lot. He works with writers. He's worked with a lot of actors, Royal Shakespeare people, a lot of actors in LA. And so that part of it is really attractive to me. You know, after dealing with pathology for years and years and years, it's interesting to have a technique that I can now do with people just to enhance their creativity. So my practice now is really just centering on this stuff, this kind of dream work. And it's very cool because the other thing it does is that I think it's brilliant that Robbie did is he takes Hillman's sort of phenomenological view of things, which Hillman sort of graphs onto archetypes and things like that. And he just sort of says, well, you know, we don't really need to graft it onto all these archetypes and everything. Let's do like, you know, Gindlin sort of phenomenological psychotherapy. Let's take all our knowledge about what we think is the unconscious and where we think it's coming from and where we think these images are coming from the unconscious. Let's take all that stuff and bracket it off and put it over here. And then when we go into the dream work, we're just going to have an experience of the dream images, right? We're just going to go in and have an experience of the dream images. And the big thing in the work is that you experience the dream images not only from your sense of self, your ego, if you will, but you also then transit into the images themselves and experience what's going on in the dream from the different forms or different images in the dream, which is very, very powerful experience to have. And then you just don't interpret anything. You just have the experience, and then that's the dream work. And then later on, you can talk about it, interpret it, or do whatever you want. But the actual dream work session, you don't do the interpretation. You actually put that to the side. I really like that. I like the idea that I don't have to bring the baggage with me into the experience of the dream. And that was very, very appealing to me, and not to be making assumptions about where the images come from. And, you know, are they archetypes? Are they from repressed stuff? You know, whatever else, which is the thing we were talking about earlier about, like, you know, I don't have to bring the tribe into the dream work, right? I don't have to bring the limits of whatever tribe I'm in into the dream work, and just do the dream work and have the experience of it. And I found it very, very powerful. And so this is the latest thing that I'm doing, you know, that I'm really into. And Robbie's a very cool guy. I love him to death. He's just the most interesting person I think I've run across. And the other person that we work with is Jill, and she's a Jungian analyst. What's her last name? I'm blanking on it now. And she's an analyst on the East Coast of America. Robbie is bi-coastal, multi-country. He's half the time in Australia, half the time in Santa Barbara up here, and everywhere else in the world, traveling around all the time. And the Jungians like to travel. I've never met people more in my life who like to travel than these Jungians. Unbelievable. They're going everywhere, you know.
That's
so the
very
pandemic
true.
is really affecting them, you know. But I like to mention that stuff because that's what I'm doing. That's the most, at least, you know, as far as practice stuff that I'm really involved in now. And trying to build a practice doing the dream work has been really interesting, because it's really hard to explain to, you know, a person off the street, you know, what you're doing. And, you know, how can you do some sort of form of something that doesn't have any assumptions about, you know, the mind or the unconscious or anything? That's really difficult. So I'm wrestling with that right now, you know. That's been kind of fun.
Yeah, but that's really at the essence of psychoanalysis. Is like at the core, it should be it's just exploration of the mind, right? Without any idea of like what the
Yeah,
ultimate goal is, or like putting any
yeah,
of these theories
yeah,
on top of it. Just
yeah.
explore the mind.
I think so too. And if you look at the writings of really great analysts, you know, Freud, you know, Jung, you know, you are seeing when they're doing their sessions, you know, they are not bringing the baggage in with them. You know, the interpretations, they slip it in, right? But it's not like you're beating people over the head with it. And, you know, even my dad, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, I some bias that I think he's a great analyst, but, you know, you read some of his works, and he wrote, by the way, I'll give him a shout out. He's got a new book out, which he talked to you about already, so I won't mention that one. But he has a psychoanalytic textbook on psychoanalytic technique that is literally the best textbook on psychoanalysis I've ever read in my life. It is really brilliant, and you really get the sense of, you know, how an analyst is with the patient, and, you know, with the warm neutrality in a very phenomenological way, where you're just, and he describes it as you're walking along with the patient during the process. You know, you're not beating over the head with your theory, your tribe. You're just walking along and just trying to experience with them. And I thought that was just really beautiful. I found that to be one of the very inspiring things that he's written, and I think you see that. I think you see that in analysts of all stripes, who are really, really, really good. I think that's really true. And that's something I aspire to, and I still have to work a lot on, of not wanting to jump in, because I'm an academic. I make my living lecturing to people. I lecture to 100 people at a time, multiple times a week. I'm kind of like a stand-up comic that, has a 15-week gig, of 3 hours a week, and that's kind of my job, my day job. And if I don't lecture to people about stuff, I start to have jonesing for it. It's like an addiction, like got to get my fix in, and so I have to be very careful in a clinical setting or a session, not to want to jump in and start lecturing. That's the problem, as my advisor used to tell me. And when I was actually supervising somebody, it wasn't me, I was supervising somebody, and I went to my advisor one day, and for a session, I was like, he's driving me crazy, this guy I'm supervising, he's just lecturing to the patients and all this stuff. And he said, yes, yes, he's doing a little sermonette, it's a little sermonette, like, yeah, don't do that, so I still remember that, like, and I have to tell myself not to do that, because that's a tendency when you're a professor to want to lecture,
What do you
I
teach?
love lecturing. I teach at a state university here in Southern California, and I was before here I was at Harvard Medical School, which is we could have a whole nother discussion about that. A very interesting place. And I was lured here to this little state college because it was a chance to actually start a university. So I was one of the founding faculty. And so you don't get that chance much in your life to actually start a university from scratch. I mean, the first year we were doing everything from deciding on, what kind of sealant to put on the parking lot to, how people were going to get tenured and what departments to have. And, we did everything. There was 13 faculty, and we decided and did everything, because we were the only ones there. It was us and the cops. They had a police department that was there, and it was us. And we took over the site of a former mental hospital, which is a whole nother thing that was really interesting, because I worked in a sister hospital in Northern California. So I had all this deja vu. It was almost like post-traumatic stress going back to the state hospital, like, oh my God. But I had a chance to found a university. So I came here and I was the founding founder of the psychology department. And so I put together the psychology department, and I brought in very good colleagues who were much smarter than me to help with that sort of thing. And that was my entree into, I've been doing academic stuff for years and going in and out of academia. And this was sort of my entree into like the full-time, full-on professor thing. And we founded this little university, and it's still going, thank goodness. And the psych department is now the largest, I think, single department in the university. It's huge. We're like 90% women. We are probably sending more, I'm just guessing at this, we're probably sending more Latinas to graduate school in psychology than anywhere else in the country. I would bet on that. We have a 40% graduate placement rate of our students. 40% of them go to graduate school, which is 10% above the national average, 45%. And most of those students, many of them are Latinas, which are, underrepresented in clinical psychology, especially. And the idea that they can go then serve Latina communities, which is really underserved, is a really cool thing. So I feel very good about that work. I teach classes because I founded the department. I can teach whatever I want. My training is, I have dual training in clinical psychology and also in quantitative psychology. And so for years and years and years, all I taught was quantitative psychology. That's what I did at Harvard. I was just a research guy, was the biostatistician in the back of the room, and I just did the stats for people. And so I came here and I said, you know what? I can hire people now to teach the stats who are much smarter than me, and I can do stuff that I want to do. So the first class I taught was a class on Asian philosophy, and that's also a very popular class, and I still teach that. I'm teaching it now. And I teach a class on Nazi Germany with a historian, which has been really, really fascinating. I teach personality theory, I teach clinical psychology, I teach foundations of psychotherapy, typical stuff. And then I also teach a class on bizarre behavior and culture bound syndromes, which was, if you go to my reviews on Rate My Professor, you'll see the comment many times, Volkan goes off on tangents. And I read that and I said, you know, they're right. And so what I'm going to do is take all the tangents I go off on, collect them all together and make a class out of it. And so that's what I did. And then I also started a blog, Bizarre Behavior, bizarrebehavior.org now, or I can't remember I should send it to you. I haven't written much on it lately, but I started this blog and then started to write things that were going to be in the class and kind of back and forth for the class. And then it became a thing on its own. And I've been doing that class now for, I don't know, God, 10, 15 years. And that's been a very interesting class because that has been the area now of the research that I'm writing. I start writing about sort of atypical psychopathology, or severe psychopathology and atypical psychopathologies, things that sort of fall through the cracks of the DSM. You know, like I write, I've been writing now about dissociative disorders and, you know, dissociative disorders. And of course, you know, the thing that falls through the cracks is demonic possession, right? So I'm finishing up a paper now on demonic possession. I just finished a paper on hoarding, which I just sent off to get published. And I'm just amazed in the psychoanalytic world how long it takes to get something published in a psychoanalytic journal. It is unbelievable. This, friends, is a place that is ripe for disruptive technology because, you know, there are all these, they call them predatory journals, but, you know, some are actually really quite good, where you send your thing in, you pay a small fee, and you can get your journal article published in a month. You can get it reviewed and published in a month. Blind peer review done, it's published online in a month, you know, nicely formatted. Anybody can get it from anywhere. And, you know, that's happening all over the place. And at the same time, these analytic journals, one I submitted a paper to, they were telling me it's going to be 8 to 9 months before they even really reviewed it. You know, I sent off a paper to the journal, you know, the International Journal of Psychoanalysis a couple of years ago. It was 7 months before I got back the rejection letter. You know, I mean, this is just crazy. This is ripe for disruptive technology to come in and say, hey, we're going to do this right. We're going to have a journal that's going to review things quickly, get stuff out really quick, put it online so everybody can see it. This is a way, by the way, I believe we could really, really support psychoanalysis and you know, make psychoanalysis more visible. You know, the cognitive behavioral people are not waiting that long to get their articles published. You know, they are getting them like this. And we're, you know, a year before your article gets published. Sorry, I'll get my soapbox for a minute. This is crazy. So I'm encouraging somebody out there, start a depth psychology journal, do it like how Vanessa is doing it. Don't make it tribal. Make it depth psychology, open to anybody in any sort of form of analysis that people are doing. Or you know, analytic work, you know, that people are doing, and put it online, make an online journal. If I could do these sort of task of psyche things, these detailed things, I would personally do it, but it's really not my talent to do that kind of thing. But I would support whoever did it because it's just crazy. Because anyway, so that's a little aside. But I'm
like, how do we make this happen?
Yeah, well, we should talk more about it, and maybe people listening to your podcast would be interested in.
This could be an Unbehagen project. Make a journal online.
I would do anything that I can be of help to it. Count on me, and maybe we can get more people and have a discussion about it sometime. I think it'd be awesome because there is a need. We want to publish our stuff. We want to get it out there. We have a great viewpoint in the analytic community of stuff to say. And you know, we're just not getting it out quickly enough. We have these old crusty journals that are taking forever. And I'm not going to mention the one I submitted to by name because I don't want them to reject my thing if somebody listens to this. But you know, it's just crazy out there. I mean, you know, and I can send off papers. I send off paper to some of these online journals, and I can get things published in a month. You know, and they do a very good job, and then everybody can see it. I got an article published recently on delusional misidentification disorders, which is another thing that I talk about in my class. You know, Capgras syndrome, Fragoli delusion, Cotard's syndrome, these sort of things, and body dysmorphic disorder, and apodominophilia. You know, where you feel like you really have an urge to cut off an arm or leg, and then you go and figure out a way to do it. So I wrote a paper on that, and I sent it off to this journal in Asia, and it's already going to be published. I think it just came out like yesterday. and then it's URL and it's online and it's up. Anybody in the world can read it. And they encourage me to post it on ResearchGate and academia, to put it on my own, things that I have out there and get it out there. I mean, that's the kind of attitude that that I'd love to see in the analytic community, with journals and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
we should talk about that at some point. I'd love to do it. I think we should do it.
Yeah, and I just thought of, there's a journal called the European Journal of
Yeah,
Psychoanalysis.
yeah. I actually submitted a paper to them on bunker mentality and Hitler and Trump. So I just sent it off 3-4 weeks ago, and they look to me like a journal that could do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I have not heard word one from them. This has been 3 or 4 weeks now. I haven't heard anything from them. Even if they got the paper, I don't know if they even got it. So I got to contact them. And I'm not putting them down. Again, don't hate me because I'm saying this in a public forum. But again, I haven't heard anything from them. And what my rule now is that I'm doing for myself is I'm giving the journals a month to get back to me. If they don't get back to me in 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, they don't get back to me, at least let me know they got the paper and they're reviewing it. What I'm doing is sending them a nice note saying, thanks, but I'm rescinding my submission and sending it somewhere else. I just can't, especially as academics, we live and die by getting stuff published. I mean, I'm tenured, but if I wasn't tenured, there's no way I could have a psychoanalytic research agenda, because it just takes too long. I wouldn't get tenured, it would take too long. And, if I would start studying CBT because I can get them published right away. I do, quantitative studies in CBT. I'd measure things in short-term outcomes. There's not a lot of studies in CBT where they're measuring things after 5 years out, at the end of the CBT, because it's an academic-driven discipline. People aren't getting tenured doing that, right? So we need ways to publish quickly. We can get more academics interested in psychoanalysis, and then we can start, doing more studies, and it can start steamrolling. Right now, I mean, we don't have a lot of academics in psychoanalysis. A lot of them are hidden. They're like me. I probably got hired on my job because I do quantitative stuff, right?
Right.
Quantitative
You
training.
just slid the psychoanalysis in
So I can
there.
slide in, but that's not a good way to go. That's a sucky way, a roundabout way to go. I mean, I have two doctorates, which is stupid. The more doctorates you have, really, the more stupid you are. Why would you do that? Why not just have one and have a proper career? You should be able to go and do it. But if people could get published in psychoanalysis more quickly, then that would really help us to promote it. And I think that's needed. And it's moribund in American academic circles, unless in psychology departments. And if you go to the English department, and some of the humanities, you can find analytic people there. Analytic stuff outside the context of clinical work, we could have a debate about, is that a good, bad thing? Is it something different, apples and oranges? I don't know, but at least they're there. At least they're thinking this way. I can go to the English department and talk to people and they know what I'm talking about. That's great. But why can't I go talk to my psychology colleagues? I mean, now at my university, I am the only analytically oriented person in the whole department. I mean, I think I'm the only one who teaches Freud. I'm certainly the only one who teaches Jung. And then, neo-analytic people, I'm probably, other than a paragraph or two in a personality theory textbook, I'm the only one who goes into depth. I have another colleague whose training is in, she does research in terror management, which is related to existentialism. So she is much more open to Freud and stuff. And so she's more Freud friendly, but certainly that's not her area of research. So I'm the only one, right? The other guy we had who was analytic, a real hardcore Freudian, he retired. So I'm the only one. And if you went around to departments, in my area, you would find that. I also teach at Cal Lutheran, which is a little university here. They have a doctoral program. They have a PsyD program in clinical psychology. And I teach in that program. I was teaching in it actively. Now I just do dissertation stuff. But they had a whole analytic track. And Morris Eagle was involved. I don't know if you know Morris. He's been around for a long time. He's a great guy. He was in that track, and he retired, and they've now all gone almost completely CBT. There's no analytic people there anymore. I taught the class on psychoanalytic psychotherapy there to the doctoral students, and it was like going into a hostile war zone because they were forced to take it, and they're all CBT people, and they just spent the whole time either just resisting learning about the stuff or just arguing to me. But then they would come in with case histories and say, I don't know why I'm having so much trouble with this patient. She loved me so much the first couple sessions, told me how much I was hating her, and now she's just really pissed off at me for no reason. And I don't understand what's going on. I'm just like, okay.
Transference.
Well, we're now going to have the lecture on transference. And by the way, didn't I mention that transference also becomes negative, and let's talk about negative, but they don't get any training in that, which is amazing. And then what they're doing now is they're developing terms for a lot of analytic things. They have a term for the unconscious. I can't remember what it is, something like, non
outside of awareness or something.
Well, outside of awareness schemas or something that, so they're introducing stuff in, they're pulling stuff in from psychoanalysis, but they're not, they're not acknowledging where it's coming from. And I don't want to go off on CBT. I don't have any problem with CBT. It's fine. It's good for what it is. But this idea that we're just not getting any analytic stuff in these doctoral programs to me is a little bit annoying. Many years ago, I put together, actually when I was a clinician in the hospital, I put together a list of psychoanalytic friendly universities. And I had that posted on the very early online stuff for a long time. And then I gave that list over to David Downing, who's, I don't know if you probably know David. I haven't talked to him in like 20 years, but he's the guy, he's a big guy. He's very involved in Division 39 of the APA. And he took it over, and I just joined the Division 39 just because what the hell do I have to do during the pandemic? And because I was looking at journals to try to publish, and I was interested in their journals, so I started reading their things. I saw he was there, and he's a good guy and an analyst. I guess he's down in LA now. And he kept the list going, so the list is still up there. And I was very happy to see that the list of psychoanalytic programs, friendly university programs, is there. And I was sad to see that it seems a little bit diminished. And I think they're more out there than the list shows. I think there's guys like me out there who are the lone guy or one or two people in the program who are doing stuff. And so I would like to see him, I thought maybe if I had time to volunteer, doing some more research on it. But it's still out there. So if you go to Division 39, you can find the list of psychoanalytic programs, psychoanalytic friendly university programs. It isn't a long list. And I think, we could change that, by publishing. This is my rant and rave. So this is what I'm doing now. I'm spending the pandemic trying to write. And so this is my ranting and raving about, maybe I'm just impatient. I don't want to wait 6 months to publish something. I want to get it out and move on to the next thing. So, yeah.
No, but like I said, I'm all for getting psychoanalysis out into the world more.
Yeah. And your last podcast with Joel, I thought was great. And I thought he was making very, very good cogent points about, the need to do this. And, it's a great form of therapy. It's also a form of a way that we can understand, larger groups. We can understand culture. We can understand, cultural phenomenon. And, I'm very interested in that. That's a lot of my writing now, is to look at, not so much, like the case studies and looking at, sort of analytic techniques as much as just trying to use that understanding to look out into the real world, to get out of the consulting room and turn our lens out to the real world and look at what's going out there. And, as I mentioned, with Robbie, I'm interested in trying to do that with music, and that may be something I'm going to be thinking about soon. And what enhances our creativity? How do you become a good musician? What's going on unconsciously? What inspires people to become musicians? What inspires people to want to play guitar or sing or dance in front of hundreds and thousands of people? And one of the things I've written a lot about, and that I'm very interested in, again, this is also somewhat derivative of my dad's work, but it's narcissism, right? In the way that narcissism is conceptualized in psychoanalysis. And I've been thinking a lot about that and lecturing a lot about it. And, I think we've got the severe narcissism down really well, the Kernbergian, my dad's stuff, we understand from an object relations perspective, narcissism pretty well. What I'm more interested in now is, what about what I call compensatory narcissism? Narcissism that maybe develops at a later developmental stage. If you look at rock musicians, you'll find that, right Oedipal period, maybe a little bit after, sort of between Oedipal and latency, in that period of time, there is some sort of narcissistic wounding that happens. There's some sort of, trauma, common one is parents getting divorced. One I like to talk about in my class, I talk about the musician, Bret Michaels, right? You guys know him. He's from Poison. And then he had, the Bret Michaels. He had the great TV show, The Rock of Love, right? Which, by the way, I'm a big proponent of reality TV as a laboratory for psychoanalysis, because we cannot ethically do experiments where we stick a bunch of people in a house together and feed them alcohol, and watch what
See
they
what they do.
But if you're a TV producer, you can do, reality TV producers can do that, and they do that. And so they have these brilliant shows, and you watch them and go, oh my God, there you can just see, whatever analytic, concept you want to see in vivo, there it is. And Rock of Love is a great show for that. And Bret Michaels was the main guy in that show. And what you get from that, get a little bit of his background. He was a kid who had, he came down with type 1 diabetes, right in this time period, right? And this, in my speculation, because I've not seen him personally, my speculation is this inspires a sort of compensatory narcissism, where he is compensating for that narcissistic wound by, wanting to get out in front and be the pretty boy and the guitar player and do all those kind of things. And I think if you look at a lot of rock musicians, you'll find a similar dynamic. And so he becomes narcissistic, right, in a way, but he's narcissistic in a way where he also has an awareness of his narcissism. In other words, his core self-identity is well put together, right? It's pretty well put together, but there's a little aspect of it where there's this narcissistic wounding. Unlike somebody who's a severe narcissist, where they're narcissistic, they're, what does my dad call it, the grandiose narcissistic self, is basically centered around this feeling of being special, in a sort of object constellation of somebody who has, been raised, like you would if you were borderline personality disorder. You have this early childhood disruption in your object relations, your object integrity doesn't happen. You've got these things, but you were able to build this sort of core grandiose self, and center, your self-identity gets centered around that. And so constantly got to be pumped up full of admiration to keep it going, or that you feel like you're going to die. And you've got somebody like Trump, or you pick your narcissistic leader, they're out there, severe narcissistic leaders. The rock musician is different than that. He's somebody who has more self-awareness. They have their personality, their self is relatively well put together. Yeah, but there's this aspect of them where there's a narcissistic wounding that they're compensating for. And so I'm very interested in that. And that's something I want to, I'm thinking about trying to do some research on. If I could get access to some of these guys and actually be able to talk to them and interview them. This is one of the things I try to do. And of course, that's very difficult. So I have to do it from secondary sources, less convincing. But I think there's something about that. And I think there's something about musicians where you see that, and that the playing an instrument is a way of perhaps putting a salve over these sort of compensatory narcissistic wounds. It doesn't necessarily do the same thing. I think if you're a severe narcissist, your narcissistic personality person, I don't think you find the same sort of thing. And again, this is all speculative. This is just ideas off the top of my head, but it's something I'm interested in studying, because, I'm a musician. I feel I probably have some of that sort of compensatory narcissism. And, probably that's one of the driving unconscious forces for me to become a guitar player, to play guitar. The idea also of guitars or instruments as linking objects, compensating for some form of grief, or even transitional objects. I think there's a concept there too. In my hoarding paper, I write about things that are being hoarded as transitional objects. And hoarders, when they collect these objects, they go into sort of a transitional space, and I think that transitional space is very interesting, because music and being a musician, when you're playing with other people and you have this sense of sort of oneness with your instrument, I think there's a sort of entry into some sort of transitional space there. And I also think, if I put my Jungian hat on for a second, there's also something that connects you to something that's greater than just, stuff that you've repressed from your own unconscious. I think there is something that is very universal, or I don't use really the term collective unconscious, but there's something out there in the collective that maybe human beings, maybe our brains wired the same way or whatever, that music does something to, is it activates a different part of the brain, or a different part of what we're tuning into spiritually, that is not just something that comes from my own personal unconscious repressed stuff. And there those things meet, right? The Freudian transitional space and the Jungian sort of collective, encounter with the archetype. There's a similarity there, and I think in music especially those things overlap. And so I'm very interested in that. And again, this is just something I started to think about, and maybe that's the next thing I write about. I don't know.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
You could always read their memoirs. There's a lot of like rock musician memoirs.
Yeah, I'm reading Keith Richards right now, and that
That's
guy
what
is
I was thinking of.
amazing. That guy's amazing. I mean, but again, if you read his early life, you get this similar picture, this compensatory sort of narcissist stuff. He's a really interesting character, and a lot of these guys are really fascinating. There a lot of these rock musicians. These are guys you would want on your couch. They would make such great analytic uh, patients, because they are very articulate, and they are, many of them are, the basic parts of the personality are pretty well put together. And you talk about ego psychology, right? If you're an ego analyst, ego psychologist, you're going to go, oh, these guys are pretty good. They have good defenses. They're maybe some of them aren't the most healthy things, but they have good defenses. And the fact that Keith Richards isn't a drug addict living on the street, points to that guy's personality being put together maybe better than a lot of drug addicts. And I say that as somebody, I wrote a book on psychoanalysis and drug addiction,
Well, let's talk about that.
which is by the way, I'll give myself a shameless plug. It is online at freepsychotherapiebooks.org, which is a great website. It's run out of IPI, which is I can't remember what the initials stand for, but they're an analytic group in Washington, D.C. I think the Sharfs run it, and they have a website. And if you have written an analytic book like I did back in the 90s, and the copyright reverts back to you, and you want to get it out there, you can write to them and offer it to them to put up online, and they will host it. And they did that with my book. And my dad's got a couple books up there, I think. And there's a bunch of very good writers have books up there, and you can have a whole library of free psychoanalytic books, free analytic books available to anybody. And my book's up there, and people are more than welcome to go and read it. And it's really an object relations oriented view of drug addiction. But it touches on a lot of these things we've been talking about a little bit. If I were rewriting it, I think I would go a little more into this transitional space stuff and how drugs can maybe put you into that. I would add a little more Winnicottian spin on it, I think. I will mention my dad is writing a book on not chemical compulsion, not drug compulsion, but non-chemical compulsive behavior. And so he's going to come out with some of that stuff pretty soon. I think he'll have some stuff on that. Should be pretty interesting. So anyway.
I didn't know about this library of free psychoanalytic books.
Yeah.
What a resource.
freepsychotherapiebooks.org or .com.
I'll find
IPI.
it.
Yeah, just search, Google it, and it'll come up. And yeah, no, it's great. They have a lot of really good stuff in there, and they even break the books down by chapter. So you can go to my book and you can download the whole thing, or you can just download a chapter. And so it's up there, and It's very cool. And yeah, you just got to get and if anybody listening has written a book, and the copyrights reverted back to you, you're not selling very many copies anymore. If you look at my book on Amazon, it's going for $800 or something ridiculous. The one new copy that's out there, and then and then the used copies are going for $200. That's ridiculous, and I don't get no money from that. So
right.
I just soon have it. The idea is not to make money off writing analytic books.
No.
But the idea is to get it out there, right? So get it out there. So it's out there, and it's a great website, and they're nice people there, and they do training programs. If you're in the DC area, they do a lot of training programs, and they're very object relations oriented, and so yeah, I recommend them really highly. And so yeah, so it's a book on drug addiction, and I talk about Jimi Hendrix and Elvis, who had some of these kind of dynamics I'm describing, probably a little more primitive, a little bit earlier disruption. Not that they would be diagnosed with a personality disorder, but they had more object trauma very early on. Hendrix, loss of parent, And then, I mean, literal loss later on, but early on, the mother's not around, and there's a problem going in there. And Elvis is very interesting. Elvis was a twin, right? He was the live one, and there was a dead twin.
Oh,
And
wow.
then Elvis, mother, very interesting thing with the mother, identification with the mother, and the father goes to jail when he's very early, gets sent off to prison. And so there's very interesting things about Elvis, which would actually also be worthy of a book in and of itself, just to write a book on Elvis. If I had the copious spare time and resources to do that, I think that'd be very interesting, because he was a really interesting character, quite fascinating. But some very early object stuff, and of course, had drug problems. Elvis had real addiction problems. Hendrix did not have addiction problems. That's something that people assume, that he was addicted to drugs. He did not have addiction problems. He was not addicted to anything. In fact, he had a girlfriend who was addicted to heroin. He was very, very upset about it, and it really upset him. And he wrote some songs about her addiction to heroin. And he was very anti-heroin and anti-being addicted to heroin. But he was a poly drug user. He liked to use lots of different kinds of drugs. He wasn't addicted to anything. And of course, you all know the story that he died because he took sleeping pills, prescription sleeping pills that he thought were the same strength as the ones he got in America. But he was in Europe, and they were much stronger, and that's unfortunately what killed him. But he's a very interesting case too. And so again, all these sort of musicians out there, you could have a whole spectrum, of pathology, picking from them. I'm a huge Jimi Hendrix fan. When I was a kid, he was really the inspiration for my becoming a guitar player. And I think there was probably a time when I was a teenager where I listened to nothing but Hendrix, because I thought listening to something else would pollute my musical mind and my musical ability. I would denigrate my becoming good at playing guitar because I was listening to something that wasn't Hendrix, and so so I was very, very much influenced by Hendrix's playing. He's a brilliant player. His identification with the guitar, where the guitar really becomes an extension of himself, was almost unparalleled. I mean, they're great technicians who can play the instrument, but it's an instrument that's somewhat separate from them. Hendrix, I think the identity was complete. It was just part of himself. So very interesting.
Amazing. What's your
Yeah.
band like? What's your band called?
I play in two bands. One is called Sister Ook, SisterOok, which is a woman who is a singer from Ventura, just a town up the road from me. And she's been a musician for years and years and years, been out there. And I joined her band, 4 or 5 years ago, as the lead guitarist. And we play a lot in Southern California. We play a lot in Hollywood. We played down at the House of Blues in Anaheim, because the House of Blues in Hollywood closed down. So we played the House of Blues in Anaheim. We really like that place. And we play up here. We played every dive bar in Ventura County multiple times. And we play hard rock, not heavy metal. It's, so I make a distinction because they're really different musical genres. And yeah, and we're online. There's a sisterook.com. You can go online, or you can go to YouTube, and you can Google it. And I'm up there playing and doing my thing. And I think we've got a couple shows up there, full shows up, some better than others, and it's all her stuff. It's all Ook stuff. We call her Ook. That's her nickname. It's all her stuff, her songs. She's the composer, and I just sort of add my bit to it, right? So, but she's great. She's a wonderful person. Her husband is the bass player, and then a guy I've been playing with for a long time, a drummer, AJ, and it's just us four. And so we play around. And then I have another band with AJ called Haunted Robots, and we've been doing mostly stuff that I've written, and then some cover stuff. And we are just getting, we were in a band before, and we lost our bass player. And so we just got another bass player. And then because of the pandemic, he's dropped out. And so we are now searching for another bass player. So if any of your listeners play bass and they're in the northern Los Angeles area, I'd love to hear from you, because we're looking for somebody. But we tend to be a little more improvisational, a little more I don't know what you'd call it, jam band, jazz aesthetic. There's a little more that sort of improvisational thing, which I really, as a musician, that's really fulfilling to do. Again, you go into that space and you just sort of get lost in the music and then come in and out of it. And, for a musician, as a musician, I live for that. Right. So maybe when the pandemic gets a little bit better, you'll hear more from Haunted Robots. We'll see, not doing it to get famous anymore. So, just doing it for fun. I think I've worked through my compensatory narcissistic needs pretty much. And, hopefully, knock on wood.
What's it like to have your creative life and then your like professor psychology hats?
It's a little weird at times. I'll be playing in a club and, one of my students will show up and go, "Oh, Dr. Volkan, I know you play guitar." I'm like, "Yeah, just call me Kevin." This is a different world for me. And they don't often overlap. As I mentioned, I think to you that, when I finished my training in body imagination, Robbie and Jill and a bunch of my colleagues came to our show in Hollywood, and that was sort of my final exam. And I'd done a whole bunch of dream work around playing a particular guitar that I have, that it was felt like it was fighting me. And so we did a whole bunch of this intensive dream work, and I got up in front of the stage, and again, it was one of those things where the guitar just sort of became part of me. It was like, I played brilliantly, and I felt really good about that. And that was due to the dream work, so that's actually where I'm integrating them now. I mean, integrating it into the Freudian world is harder, because again, this thing that we were talking about before, the tribalistas, that we have to be in the tribe, and there's certain constraints about what's considered to be, good behavior and bad behavior. If you went to a hardcore old school psychiatric ego psychologist, with white middle class values, being a rock guitar player is probably not going to be one of the therapeutic, goals, at the end of your analysis. So, it just depends. I mean, I guess for me, it's still a work in progress. As I get to more closer to retirement age, I'm contemplating now, moving from being an academic, retiring as a professor, and then going into sort of what I call private life. And it's private life probably, basically just doing dream work practice and being a musician. That's probably, and a writer, because I like to write, and I'm probably going to do those things and get away from the academic side eventually. I'm getting close to it. I'm not there yet, but it's I can see light at the end of the tunnel. So, I may be retiring, and I'm also involved. I'm involved in a million different things. I'm also involved with a group with some Jungians, one of whom's daughter is getting her PhD at Cambridge in England in business, and we are starting a consulting group, the Hermita Group, named after Hermes, the god of the crossroads, right? And we are going to be doing consulting and probably doing some sort of travel type things. We have a part of that group is going to be called Travel Within, and we're going to be going to really interesting places and then doing dream work, and probably embodied imagination dream work, but it may end up being some Jungian stuff. There may be some Freudian stuff we haven't really, also involved with it. And that's an ongoing project that we've been working on. And again, sidelined by the pandemic. We were supposed to go to Indonesia this spring and to Bali, and that got sidelined. And so we are doing more planning about that now. And I think hopefully by the time we have a vaccine, we should be putting together some trips and go off and do these kind of cool things. And so again, because Jungians love to travel and they love to go off to these cool places and do these really cool things. And so I'm having fun hanging out with the Jungians. And
Yeah, my
man,
friend, I have a friend that's a Jungian analyst, and she is also an astrologer, and she lives in like San Francisco, New York. She has a place in
yeah,
India. She's in
yeah,
Morocco.
yeah.
She's like always somewhere. I can't keep track of her.
Isn't that nuts? I don't know what a life they live. It's awesome. I'm so into that. I think it's just very cool what they're doing. I mean, I don't live that way because I live like a, proper householder. I've got a wife who's an attorney and works a lot. And I've got a son who's just turned 18 and is trying to go off to college. But, I've been taking care of him, and, now he's trying to get out of the house and individuate. And that's a whole big mess, but at least he got into college. So that's great. And he's doing college from home. But, I think after he's actually able to go off, then maybe, my ability to travel will once the pandemic's over. I look forward to that, and it's cool to see people having these kind of lifestyles that I just think, oh, that's really neat. How do they figure that out? So it's neat. It's neat to see how other people do things, because again, in the Freudian world, we tend to be a little more solid and staid, and we stay in one place, and we have our practice, and that's how we do it. And you were on the cutting edge, Vanessa. You are the inspiration, I think, at least for me a little bit. And, the way that you practice and what you're doing, I think is really awesome. And my
It's a
hat's
new
off to you.
world.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were doing this before the pandemic, which is very cool, and so, I will take some inspiration from you, and probably doing my dream work practice. A lot of that's going to be, now it'll all be on Zoom or be online. But I think even afterward, I think it's a cool way to do things. So.
Yeah, and it does work. Like my husband had to travel a lot because he makes films and things like that, so he'd have to like
Oh,
travel to
yeah.
openings and
Yeah.
music. He makes music and stuff, so he has to travel, or he used to have to travel a lot. So I
Yeah.
could see people from wherever we were, so
Yeah.
that was also helpful. I felt like before I left the States, I had to take weeks off all the time, and people just didn't have treatment when I was away. But then
Right.
after I started doing everything online, then people's treatment actually became more consistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
Yeah. Yeah.
actually better in that way, I think.
Yeah. I mean, of course, as we know, consistency is really, really important. I agree with you. More important than being in person. I mean, the fact that you're just with, your therapist, your analyst, in some way, shape, or form. I think that's awesome. Yeah. So yeah, you're doing a cool thing. And again, my neo-Jungian teachers, Robbie and Jill are also doing that, and I think it's really great. And so more of it, and everybody's experimenting on what works and what doesn't, and the milieu, and do I have my real office behind me, or do I have a fake office, and how do we do this? And of course, I'm teaching all my classes on Zoom now, and so I have 40, 50 people on Zoom at the same time, and that's a whole nother thing, to see how that works. And I know people who are doing group therapy on using Zoom, and that's interesting dynamic going on. And so yeah, it's a brave new world. We're all trying these new things, and I think we're all going to figure out what works the best for us. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think even after the pandemic is over, I think people are going to realize so many things that we thought that we had to do in person, we realize are not necessary. We can do them as good or better. If you're reading any of the literature out there now, or the magazine articles or whatever, oh, education is dying, college education is crappy now because everybody's doing the classes online. That's not necessarily true. I don't think it's necessarily worse. It's just different.
Mm-hmm.
It's just different. And I think that we're going to be seeing, I think even after the pandemic is over, I'm going to still do a lot of my work online, my teaching work online. I don't see going back and doing a lot of in-person. Maybe a little bit, I'll have office hours probably in person, but I don't think I'm going to go back and just teach wholesale in-person classes anymore. I think that ship has sailed. I found a way to do it very efficiently, and I think the students seem to like it, and they're doing really well. And again, like your therapy sessions, my students can be anywhere, and they can access my courses, and they can I have material online. They can get it anytime. They can watch my lectures, that kind of stuff. And I've spent the last 2 years basically putting most of my lectures online. So if you go to YouTube, you can Google and you can find all my lectures online. And
Oh, I'll link to it.
yeah, well, yeah, maybe I sent you the playlist link. It's in that thing I sent you. But if you want to see all my lectures in the Nazi Germany class, well, they're all up there. And and hey, and they're not perfect, by the way, everybody. There's plenty of things in there that are not perfect, and I have to go back every once in a while and revise things. And oh, I made a mistake. I said something that was wrong, and but that's part of the fun of lecturing, is that
That's life.
you learn. You learn by doing it, right? But I figured it's just better to put everything out there and make it available to students, and they can go and read it. And I get people from other places who see something I did on YouTube, and they'll say, "Oh, that was really cool." And so I really enjoy that. It's fun. Again, it's like just taking it and just making it available to the world, just opening yourself up to the world, getting out of the consulting hour or out of the classroom and opening yourself up to the world. So I think this is a good time to be doing that a little bit. because we're so contracted. Everybody's so contracted because of the virus. You know, anything we can do to sort of open up and sort of, you know, make ourselves available, you know, and make connections between people, I think is really valuable right now.
Absolutely. And I think that everyone that I talk to has said that they're going to keep some aspect of their practice online, whether it's
Yeah,
teaching or seeing patients. I
yeah,
mean, literally everyone
yeah,
sees the advantage of it. And also, I think it goes along with the kind of overall theme of what's happening is that we're like, we've had these structures in place, including the psychoanalytic institutes that have all these rules, and they've kind of told us all, like, this is how it works and this is what we're going to do. And it's been all very like top down and like authoritarian, and everybody's had to fit into these boxes to like get the approval of these authorities. And I feel like this way of working with the especially with the internet making this available to us, gives everyone more like personal agency of figuring out what's the best way to work for them with their lives or the way they want their lives to be. And then, you know, like I'll look at the best way for me, and then people that works for too, they can work with me. And if they want to work in some more rigid way in an institute, they can go do that too. That's not going to go away either, you know,
yeah,
but it just
yeah,
gives
yeah.
more options for people to have more agency in making decisions.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's brilliant, and you know, I think it's wonderful that you're spearheading, you know, a movement in the analytic world to do this. And you know, again, we need more of it. And I'm again somebody who's not in a tribe. You know, I think it's really wonderful, but I don't think the institutes have to go away either. I think they can that always can be an option for people. And if somebody is drawn to that, if that's what they have an appetite for, you know, the rules and the hoops to jump through and everything, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's helpful for some people, but not for everyone.
yeah, but
We just need options.
it should just be one of the options among many. And again, you know, I think we're seeing, and I do think we're seeing some of the institutes, you know, at least in the analytic therapy training programs, not the analyst programs, but the analytic therapy training programs. I think they're starting to be a little bit more flexible. You know, that's what I'm hearing from people involved in those things, and I think that's a good thing. You know, and we need more flexibility. You know, I think rigidity is a bad thing. You know, we'll all be rigid when we die, you know, so let's stay
I was gonna
flexible now that
say
we're
rigidity is
living and
death.
breathing. Yeah. So let's all stay flexible and, you know, make it a living organismal sort of thing, you know, that we're doing here, you know, that we all can be involved in and that kind of thing. So I think it's really good, you know.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, psychoanalysis is thriving more in the humanities and film and literature,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
not in the psychology courses, and it's not in psychiatry anymore at all. So
Yeah.
to open
Yeah.
up like the ability for different people to train and even lay analysis, you know, it just opens up the scope of what
Yeah.
psychoanalysis can be and brings more psychoanalysis to the world.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about that. You know, part of me thinks that, you know, if you take the analytic stuff and you completely divorce it from, you know, the consulting hour, from understanding psychopathology, understanding, you know, positive psychology, you know, that interaction with the person, you know, in the analytic hour or the therapy hour, whatever it is, I wonder that it loses something. Um, and likewise, if you're just in the therapy hour and you're just in the psychopathology thinking and you are isolated from the world, that's also sort of bad. And you know, I'd like to see sort of the melding of those two things. I do think it, in using analysis of whatever kind, to be working with people who aren't coming in with overt pathology. You know, I think that's, of course, you know, if you're Freudian, everybody's neurotic, but you know, like, you know what I'm saying, you know, that I could go see an analyst because I want to enhance my creativity, because I think that, you know, and again, the Jungians are really good at this, you know, that you go see a Jungian because it's almost a spiritual motive, you know, because I want to have better awareness of myself, you know, and of the world and of these things that contribute to me, these transpersonal things. But I think the Freudians can do that too. And I think, you know, different types of analysis can also enhance that sort of creativity, that you don't have to be having some sort of crisis or trauma in order to go into analysis. All you really need is curiosity, right? So whatever foments curiosity, I think is a really, really good thing. And again, so I'm really happy that we have colleagues in the humanities that are doing this, and they're applying this stuff to what they're doing. But I also think they may get some benefit by grounding it in, in the sort of place where in the origins where the stuff came from, right? And I think that's important too, and many are doing that. Many are doing they're in analysis themselves, they're in therapy themselves. Many are doing that, and many are also getting training in, being the therapist, being the analyst. But I think some of it, I see some of it, to me, it seems like it's drifting off a little bit. And, because it's one of these things where, it becomes like a philosophy that becomes tautological. You can make anything into anything. I think we got to be a little careful for that. We got to keep a critical, like a third mindset over here of a little critical viewpoint that we constantly ask ourselves, we're not just fabricating things. We do this in the dream work that I do, the embodied imagination. One thing you watch is the client, the patient, if they start fabricating things, it's no longer the image from the dream. It's now they're just making stuff up, like from their cognitive ego. Their ego is just making things up. You got to, let's
becomes too like intellectualized.
Intellectualizing they're making their intellectualizations into images, right? And so we want to watch for that, because I think that it becomes very easy to start spinning fantasies, right? And so we can do that in this work because of its sort of philosophical nature. It's not like, well, I'm going out and measuring something and doing a statistical test to test a hypothesis. We don't do a lot of that. We are really looking at case histories, and we're sort of looking for pattern recognition. And so rather than recognizing a pattern, from the ground of what we're looking at, it's very easy for us to use our egos to impose a pattern that comes from some bias or something that we have. And again, your training is to reduce that, right? Your training, as an analyst, to be, neutral, to be a neutral projective screen, so you can perceive those patterns. But I think when we start getting off into, especially when cultural stuff, it becomes very easy to start imposing patterns on things. And that is, for me, that's something I find I need to watch out for. It's no different than doing quantitative research, right? And actually, there's a real similarity. I was just talking to my friend about this the other day. There's a real similarity between doing statistics and doing analytic work. That what are we doing as statisticians? We are trying to find hidden patterns, right? So I do something, a statistical technique, something like factor analysis, right? Which is a technique that was, a big part of my training when I was coming up. I worked with a guy who was a student of Cattell, right? Cattell is the famous factor analysis guy. I worked with one of his students, was my advisor. And factor analysis is where you measure a bunch of things and you determine a pattern of things underlying, sort of the surface level, right? They call them latent variables, right? And so this is like, metaphorically, this is like what you do with your patients. You are seeing you're hearing a surface level thing. You're hearing the manifest parts of a dream, and then you are working back to the actual latent content underneath it, or the actual meaning, right? That's what we do as statisticians as well, right? And we have rules about how we do that and everything, and we try to do it in an objective way as possible. And probably, the more objective research is just that, it's a little more objective. There is some artistry to it. We have a little more of the side of objectivity, and in the analytic world, we have a little bit more side to the subjectivity, because the subjectivity is really important, right? You also do have to use yourself as an instrument for perceiving the patterns. And so you need to have that there. You can't completely get rid of that. Statistics where my personality doesn't matter. As long as I know technically what to do, I can run the computer, I can measure the variables with a test or something. It doesn't matter. In the analytic world, our personalities matter. We're the instrument. And so we can't eliminate the subjectivity, right? But we have to sort of keep an eye on the subjectivity. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, a little bit. We don't want it to be overwhelming, right? We're going to keep a little bit of an eye on it. So,
Yeah.
But yeah.
I also think a lot of people like in philosophy or maybe the humanities, like you said, maybe haven't been in analysis. And I feel like that's the best way that you learn how it works, or what people are saying with all these theories, is actually seeing these theories at work, like in your own life.
Yeah.
And I've even heard people say that, like, that are teaching psychoanalysis that this is a really interesting way to think, like philosophically, but that it's not a treatment that anybody would use anymore.
Right. That is a very common thing. I hear that all the time. My colleagues, that's what they say in their classes. Oh, it's not good. It's dead. Nobody does this anymore. And I'm like, there's an analytic institute 40 miles away, and you can go down there, and they're doing all sorts of great things, I mean, so yeah, it's really unfortunate. And you will hear that I mean, actually in my experience, you'll find the humanities people, English people, whatever, much more amenable to psychoanalytic treatment. The psychology people are just like the worst, it's much worse in our psychology programs, because we're trying so hard to just be objective about everything, to be scientists, right? And so we throw out all the supposedly non-scientific stuff. Psychology is still not that scientific. There's still a lot of subjectivity into it, but the idea is to throw all that out and just be a science. And we're now, I think, officially in America, psychology is considered to be a STEM discipline: science, technology, engineering, math. We're considered to be what discipline, so if we apply for a grant from wherever, the National Institute of Science, we can use, but it's not really. I mean, again, my colleagues will probably be mad at me for saying this, but it's not really, no, we're not quite there yet. It's not a bad thing, but we have to be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We have especially in clinical psychology, because our clinical background of doing psychotherapy is so rich. We have so much, and it actually really helps people. And the research has shown this over and over and over. The objective research shown this over and over and over and over and over again, that, that psychotherapy can cure people of certain disorders. That you cure people, not just give them a pill that they take the rest of their life, but, you're depressed, you can go to psychotherapy, you can finish psychotherapy, you can be cured of your depression, right? That is something that psychiatry and, psychopharmacology does not do. It doesn't cure people of anything, right? But we actually have a tool that is really wonderful. So we don't want to throw that out, even if it's based in philosophy and in art, there's an art form to it, and, you have to have some talent to be able to do it well. Let's not throw it out, because we don't really have a great alternative, And I would even guess that the CBT people, or people who do manualized forms of psychotherapy, the ones who are getting the good results are the ones who still have a talent for it. There's still some talent, there's still some subjectivity in there.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to acknowledge that because they want to be scientific, and, I get that, but, there's still some talent going on there. People who doing CBT, who have a sense of maybe a natural talent for dealing with transference, right? Transference issues. They naturally figure out how to deal with it. They have better results, right? The ones who don't deal with the transference, the patients just leave. They don't get counted. They don't get counted as the negative, by the way. They're just dropped off the face of the map. That's another. We could talk methodologically about the proper way to do the research. And a lot of CBT research, like behavioral research back in the day, there are some, you could take some umbrage with some of the things that they can cook the books a little bit, but that's true everywhere, But we have something, I think, in the analytic world. I think we have something really good to offer. And, again, I just think that's, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's important.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Dr. Kevin Volkan. For more links to his work, please visit the text accompanying this episode, including a link to his book, Dancing Among the Maenads, The Psychology of Compulsive Drug Use, available to download for free at freepsychotheraPybooks.org. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From Chapart Books, 2019. For more, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA 2 3CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. For more information, you can also visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode.
They all grease up decrepit promise of lies and cigars makes a home from a boarded up storefront, ready to bless, forgive, promise and exorcise Satan with every a sensually trembling body, unsure of just Christmas decorations signaling love after all of electricity and steroid hubris. Father Flanagan will undoubtedly provide those answers. Although mysterious doors with hieroglyphs, the devil and cut out bulging muscle launch working out is like the launch of rocket financing, destined for probing the outer inner space of others. A shortcut to slavery. There is much magic up ahead. Jesus downtown, amplified butterfly effects and oral spells, while passing Russian mystics in the Himalayas. Other clouds really as dark and heavy as they seem, wet lips and promises of forgiveness. The total cost will be $365 million per year. As always, our heads are round in black and white, so our thoughts can change direction of the street, interrupted by harp abuse, under the banner of self-importance. Yes, it's actually winter in agreement, and the American flag flaps proudly, whispering, threading, smash that crab and smash it well. All roads and interpretations very same to red leatherette couch in the basement, spasms, our violent contortions and loud moans. This time, the panties are on, sisters, having leading us up seductively to serene while both long winding and exhibitionist wondered. However, what exactly tolerance is that Moroccan connection when at and where you least expect it? These are life's little mysteries, and you can always displays of wax genitals by the doormat. We are in love. We so want to look at dissected wax vaginas and penises. Whispered. We do. To which the man replied, we are ourselves, honey, in love. This dick is obsessed, suck itself, and yet fiercely independent. Different perspectives, Ray, yet both leading to an embrace just a little existential shadow. His time will come, and a creative reenactment between the lines of past tense. Ray is looking for candy. And there is candy all over, and inside your purse there's a detour. Why? People follow those signs blindly, because the painted Mexican skulls at Union Square tell us so, vigor, while halting premature Muhammad's African mask to swallow with a message of delight and power, but most instead scream on. Fueled by a organ of a different nature. The dungeon's red leatherette. If you think shit happens, park here. I told you, come. You should have bought the coat sore face when you saw stone crab meat juice. Christmas is coming up. This is New York.